Hey everyone, super excited to kick off our investment banking office hours with Alejandro. Some amazing tips that we're going to hear from him tonight. Really quickly, as folks are trickling in, wanted to put a quick plug. We have an investment banking boot camp that starts today, and we're giving one lucky attendee on the event tonight a free seat in that boot camp. So if you are not already participating, definitely, and even if you are, definitely take your chance, shoot your shot, and sign up for this giveaway. We'll talk a little bit more about the boot camp later tonight. But we'll send a link to this giveaway here in the chat. And without further ado, Alejandro, take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick. And I'll give a little shout out to the boot camp. Um, I'll give an intro in a second, but we had a bunch of interns from my fund that did the boot camp. They're all freshmen, sophomore, juniors at great schools, and they a couple of them went through the boot camp in the fall, and they had really good things to say about it. So, um, unsolicited pitch from me to give that. But for tonight, and we'll talk a little bit about it again in a second. For tonight, though, we're going to go through kind of five tips to stand out during banking and recruiting. And the first thing I'm going to do is do a welcome with all of you, and then I'll do kind of an introduction of who I am and maybe why I'm qualified to speak to you all about this subject. But my name's Alejandro. Right now I'm a partner at Harbor Street Capital, which is a fund that I co-founded last year with two old colleagues of mine. But as far as my background, I did engineering in undergrad, spent, my started my career in consulting. So I started at Deloitte, spent 5 years there doing a lot of strategy and M&A consulting. Then decided to go to business school, went to NYU, got my MBA from Stern. And then I followed kind of a traditional path out of business schools. I went directly into banking. So I spent almost 3 years at Goldman in their consumer and retail group within the investment banking division. And at the end of that, spent almost 3 years there, and then decided to move on to a role with Fanatics, which some of you may know as kind of a sports apparel company. But they established a holding company back in 2021 to try to expand across other sports. So they started a little bit of private equity, you know, office, for lack of a better word. And I was part of the group that went out and acquired a trading card company. We acquired an apparel business. We launched a betting and gaming company. We acquired a betting and gaming company. We acquired a bunch of stuff. So I've been on that side of the equation as well, on the buy side. And from a kind of recruiting and coaching standpoint, I've spent I've always been kind of a mentor to folks. I helped do some admissions recruiting and coaching at NYU. During my time at Goldman, I was part of the NYU recruiting team. I was part of the diversity recruiting team. So I did everything from reviewing hire flixes and hire views that you all have to do sometimes when you apply, to first round interviews, to second round interviews, to super days. I did over 100 interviews while I was at Goldman. So I have a little bit of an idea. Obviously, I don't know everything, but I'll share what I can about what can make you successful during the process. That's a little bit about me. I'm also a coach on Leyland. So if you at any point are looking for one-on-one coaching, there's a link somewhere in the chat to work directly with me. But we'll pause here. And if always love to see who dialed in and where everybody's coming from. So if you all don't mind typing in the chat box where everybody's dialing in from. All right, I see Colombia, Australia. I think Australia quickly won furthest this time around, but Dallas, we got some local folks. New York, England, Indonesia, that's another one. Canada. All right, we got a nice blend. Netherlands, as always. Uh, Love seeing kind of the participation from around the world from everyone. So thank you for joining us tonight. Hopefully, it's a good session. And by the way, before we jump into the tips, um, I want to make this as interactive as possible. It's always more helpful if you ask questions, if you ask follow-up. So if you do have a question on anything I say, either type it into the chat or use the little hand raise icon on Zoom, and either Amanda or myself will help, you know, answer that question. So jumping into the kind of the five tips, we'll start with number one, and it may seem silly, it may seem obvious to you, but make your resume stand out. You have to keep in mind that these banks get bombarded with applications and with emails about coffee chats, right? When I was an associate, I got 20 to 30 emails a week of people wanting to chat with me. And it's not because I was anything special, it's just because that's how it works. You got to email a bunch of people and you got to do a bunch of coffee chats. The resume is the first thing somebody opens. They get your email and they double click the attachment and open your resume. And that is the only impression they have of you. A small email and your resume. So that's the first impression they get. And it's an incredibly important impression that they get. What does that mean? It needs to be flawless. It needs to be formatted properly. It needs to have everything in the same kind of style. It needs to look good. It needs to mimic the amount of effort and professionalism that you would put into the job. And the reason why is because imagine you send me a resume with a spelling mistake or with a bad formatting. Maybe the dates in one area you say January and the other you say Jan. These may seem like small details to you, and they are small details, but if this is your most important kind of marketing material for your brand, and that has potential formatting or detail mistakes, how can somebody expect you on the job when you're working with a client and sending them a pitch on a $5 billion acquisition to not make a mistake, right? So it's a way to really impress, and you want to come out the door, like out of the gate, really, really hot and with really, really good materials to represent yourself. And the third point here is make sure it is banking focused and it is finance focused. And what do I mean by that? If you're a finance major and you're part of the investment banking club at your school and you're part of the economics, you're a TA for microeconomics, whatever, your resume will clearly be banking focused. However, a lot of folks that are coming from either non-target schools or with non-target majors, right? Let's say you're an econ major, or you are, I guess econ would be fine, but if you're not a finance major, make sure your resume, you use it well to convey your interest in finance and in banking. What does that mean mechanically to what you're doing? Make sure you join those clubs on campus that are about finance or about banking. Make sure you're taking the relevant coursework. So make sure you're taking accounting, corporate finance, microeconomics. Make sure if you can, if you can work with a professor to do research in maybe what's happening to interest rates, anything that can showcase that you're genuinely interested in this career. Because the number of times, I'll give you a good example. I had many times where somebody would ask me to go on a coffee chat. They would tell me they're super interested in banking in their email. And then I open their resume and they are a biology major. They were the president of their biology club in high school. And now they're part of 3 science clubs on campus. The story doesn't hold, right? If they're really truly interested in banking, why aren't they a finance major? And it's okay if they're not, but then why aren't they in the banking clubs? Why aren't they in the finance clubs? So at some point, you need to make sure your resume conveys that level of interest that the recruiters are looking for. Does that all make sense? Any questions from the group on this first tip? I see one. Ryan, go for it. Can you guys hear me?
His audio might be muted.
But yeah, Ryan, can you hear me? Ryan, I don't think we can hear you. So if you want, type it. We can come back to it after. I do see a question in the chat that I suspect might be applicable to a lot of folks, but essentially, do you need to be at a big or prestigious school in order for your resume to stand out or to be successful? The answer is no. The banks recruit from a number of schools. Now, every bank does have a pipeline from what they call target schools, or you might hear core schools. And of course, it is easier to get a look there because they have a relationship with the school, they've recruited from there. And most importantly, you have classmates of yours, might be older, but they went to that bank. So when you email them and you're like, hey, I also went to the University of Florida, now you have like a rapport building point and you can, kind of have a better chance to talk to them. However, every bank, and we had it at Goldman as well, we had a super day that was for the non-target schools, where everybody else from the schools that were not highly targeted had a chance to submit their resume and eventually make it to a super day. So you do not need to be at a target school. You might have a little bit of harder time because you're going to have to kind of be really scrappy and creative with how you get coffee chats, but you absolutely do not have to go there. I work with plenty of folks, Goldman and many other banks that my classmates and friends worked at, that did not go to these like kind of target schools that you might be thinking of. So that should not stop you. I worked in consulting and I did not go to a target school for that. So that's just kind of one example there. Any other questions on the resume before we move on to tip number 2? What about degree? Okay, so some of these are a bit more specific, so we can tackle them after. If you are an experienced hire, meaning you're lateral, meaning you're currently working somewhere and you're trying to lateral into banking, I would say 2 big things you should try to be doing. Number 1 is getting experience in finance related work. So even if you're not working in like your FP&A function at your company or corporate finance, try to get exposure to those projects, right? So reach out to someone in that division, try to do something that you can put on your resume. And number 2, I don't think, but obviously it's like a CFA helps, but a CFA is like a multi-year commitment. It's not something you can do overnight. It's always helpful to do some sort of boot camp or certification, whatever it may be, to kind of cement your interest in banking, but you don't need to do multiple. Like I'm not looking at a resume and seeing how many modules of breaking into Wall Street you did, right? But as long as you can show some sort of interest, I think that's helpful. So let's move on to the second tip. As I said, your first impression is your resume because it's what everyone's going to open regardless of what your email says. However, your email is incredibly important. And I'll say a couple of things about this. Number 1, as I said earlier, as a banker, you're getting 20 emails a week from cold emails from people that are looking to do a coffee chat. And as you can imagine, bankers don't have time to do 20 of these. Otherwise, that would be the kind of their entire job, right? So people will oftentimes just, do 1 or 2 coffee chats a week with people that are emailing them. So what do I mean by being overly thoughtful in emails? You need to stand out. And what I tell people is you need to use a personalized email that makes your email memorable. What does that mean? It means, if you went to the same school as the person you're emailing, if you went to the same high school, if you had the same major, if you're from the same town, there's a number of rapport building things you can cling on to that'll be much more helpful. And I'll tell you what emails I would respond to. I would respond to people that went to the same undergrad I went to. So if they went to University of Florida, I responded to those folks because we had something in common. If they went to NYU, because I went to grad school there, or if they had any other point that was relevant to me. Some people were like, hey, we both grew up in South Florida, or we both worked in consulting, or we both live in New York, whatever it may be, anything to make your email stand out. It can't just be, hi, I'm Alejandro, I'm looking to break into investment banking. There's too many of those emails, so you have to be thoughtful. And then number 2 and 3 are combined here. And 1 is this needs to be a thing you do continuously. This is not let me just send a couple emails tomorrow morning and hope that it works and hope that I get a coffee chat. You need to build a little tracker. You've got to go look through your LinkedIn and through everybody you can connect with and have a plan and be like, look, this week I'm going to email these 10 people. Next week, I'm going to email these next 10. The following week, these next 10. And on that note, that tracker that you're using is going to help you stay organized, right? So when you reach out to 20, let's say these 3 weeks go by, you reach out to 30 people, you need to be able to look and be like, where do I need to follow up? Where do I need to, be more do I need to follow up with these 10 already? This one already responded and agreed. This one told me no. You just got to make sure you stay organized so that you can keep following up and you can keep being persistent. Because a lot of these times you need to follow up at least once just to be like, hey, did you get a chance to read my note from last week? I'm super interested to hear about your background and your career in healthcare banking. I'd love to grab 20 minutes with you if you have availability this week. So again, it's super helpful when you continue to follow up and you stay top of their inbox. So before we move on to tip number 3, and then we'll have a short miniature comment from Nick. But before we move on to number 3, Any questions on this one about the emails? We got a question here. If you can talk a little bit about networking is different in the US and in the UK. So I am not well versed in the recruiting in the UK, so I can't comment on the differences. I know the US is a bit of a warmer culture as it relates to recruiting. It's much more common to do a cold email and be like, hey, I don't know you, but we both grew up in Boston or whatever it may be. The UK is a little bit more difficult, so you have to rely a little bit more on kind of the warm introductions. But I would encourage you to talk to someone that did banking in the UK to truly understand kind of their perspective on that. Another question from the group. How can I most effectively leverage a connection I already have within a bank? The same way you can leverage every single connection. If you know anybody at the bank, or if you have a second connection through LinkedIn, or if your cousin knows someone, whatever it may be, the best thing you can do is make it easy for them, right? So you can reach out to them and either talk to them and then ask them, hey, who else can I talk to? But make it easy, right? Don't make them go figure it out. So be like, hey, thank you for chatting with me. I know you work in TMT banking in the technology group. I'm super passionate about healthcare as well. Do you know anybody, maybe an analyst in that group that you can connect me with? Right. So make it easy for them so they don't have to think and be like, let me think who I connect you with and send the email. And oftentimes I like to even volunteer, be like, look, if you just give me their email, I'm happy to send the email and just CC you on that introduction. So just make it easy for them and always try to kind of leverage that.
Do you have a lot more on this machine? One more? Thanks. It's good. I'll wait. Actually, I'll.
Sorry, yeah. And then we had another question. How early is too early to start doing coffee chats? I think as long as you are in college, it's fine. I think in high school is a little tough. Uh, and also be really mindful of when you do that. Right now, it's peak recruiting season for sophomores. They're all recruiting for their junior year internship. So the bankers are getting dozens of emails right now to try to do coffee chats. So if you're not recruiting right now for next summer, which is mainly the sophomores, I would wait and just let this all cool down and wait until like April or May when all those are done to reach out, because then you're not going to be competing with people that are currently applying. So moving on to the tip number 3. So again, like you start with your resume. Your resume's got to look really good. Number 2, you've got to send compelling emails that get people to look at your resume and to talk to you, the bankers. So now, if your resume looks good, if you send a compelling email, ideally it leads to a coffee chat, right? And those coffee chats are pretty similar every single time, right? Coffee chats have the same kind of format every single time, which is just a conversation. And it's just about understanding your background, why you're interested in banking, and then you asking some thoughtful questions about my background and why I'm doing banking, right? So it's really important when you do these coffee chats, you're always being evaluated, right? Even if it's not an interview, they're going to remember if it's a really good experience, if it's a really bad experience. If they're doing 20 coffee chats and you're just kind of an average candidate, that's fine. They won't remember either way, but they'll remember your name, but they will evaluate you. And if you do something very well or very poorly, they'll remember that as interviews come around. So you need to have 2 things very buttoned up. Number 1 is your story. So it's the classic elevator pitch. Tell me about yourself, your 90-second pitch, whatever you want to call it. But it needs to be a really, really good story. And what does that mean? It needs to be very cohesive and it needs to make sense. So going back to my example from earlier, you can't tell me, look, I was president of the biology club in high school. I went to a science-focused school. I'm studying biology and I'm the treasurer of the chemistry club. I really want to work in banking, right? Like that story just doesn't make sense. So instead, what you can say is, look, I've always loved 2 things, science and business. And in high school, I prepared for both of those. I came to this school. I'm doing a major in biology, but I'm doing a minor in business. And I've also joined the investment banking club. What I want to do is work in healthcare banking, where I can mix my passion for science with a business component. right? So it's the same story, just told very differently, and one is much more compelling. And that's what I mean by cohesive. It's got to make sense. It's got to flow naturally. The other thing you need to be really, really cautious of is sounding authentic. The number of people that will do coffee chats because they think they have to, and they're not prepared, and they don't really know what banking is, and they kind of just wing it. It's really clear to the interviewer or to the coffee chat person when that's happening. So it's got to be authentic. So you've got to have some stories in your story about what appeals to you about banking in particular, and tie it to something about yourself. So it could be something as small as, in high school, my uncle owned a pizza shop and I would help him, close the books every night. And I thought that was really interesting. It could be literally anything that sparked that interest, but it's gotta feel genuine. Again, you have like dozens of people reaching out to you. You gotta make sure that your story is genuine to folks, right? So that's really, really important. And the third, you always have to, I said it earlier, but you've got to make sure this is all connected and it kind of all makes sense. And it's got to flow, and it's got to be a journey that over time makes sense. Like I got to campus and immediately, decided to major in economics because I was super passionate about that. And I joined the banking club. In that club, I was able to participate in 3 case competitions where we had to pitch a stock or pitch an M&A deal. And I also had a chance to take, intro to corporate finance, which was one of my favorite classes in the fall. I know I'm only a freshman, but again, showing that journey and how you're evolving and getting closer and closer and getting better and better over time is really, really important to show that authenticity, to show the logic, and to show that your story makes sense. So I'll pause here for a second. There's a couple of questions, so I'll try to tackle those. One I got was one that's in here is just if it makes sense to try to recruit laterally from a middle market bank to a bulge bracket one. That really just depends. Sorry, that really just depends on you. I don't think I can't give you like a black and white yes or no answer. If you have an interest in working at a bulge bracket bank as opposed to a middle market one, the biggest consideration I would encourage you to have, to any of you considering kind of the smaller boutiques or middle market banks to the big bulge bracket ones, is the type of work that you do. When you're at a middle market bank, almost everything you do is M&A related, right? So it's all sell sides and buy sides, because you're dealing with smaller companies that are sometimes not public. When you deal with bulge bracket banks, they're the ones dealing with the Walmarts of the world, with the Amazons of the world. So you get exposure to much more than just M&A, right? Amazon does a lot of M&A, but they also raise a ton of debt, and they also issue equity, and they also, think about dividend strategy and think about capital allocation. So the bigger banks give you exposure to kind of a broader kind of coverage sphere where you do more than just M&A, and the smaller banks typically are hyper focused on just the M&A component of how this all works. Great. So now before we move on to the tips, I'm gonna hand it off to Nick for a sec.
Awesome. I'm super excited to share a little bit about our investment banking boot camp. We have some fantastic instructors, including Alejandro, who are leading this intensive program designed to help you prepare everything you need for recruiting here over these next 2 weeks. Our first session is tonight. So even if you can't join today, we'll send out the recording, of course. Would love to have you with us in the program. For everyone on this call, that one of you here tonight is actually going to get a free seat in the boot camp. If you haven't already, definitely sign up for this giveaway here. It's linked in the chat as well. And if you could jump to the next slide, I'll show just a quick overview of what we'll be talking through. We'll be focusing in detail on a lot of the things we've discussed tonight. So for example, cold outreach, networking, we're going to get tactical, talk about the exact templates you need to use, when and how and who to reach out to, and help you build a personalized strategy. And then you'll actually, as part of the bootcamp, even have a one-on-one with an investment banker to kind of flesh out that strategy, to have a mock interview session, in addition to all of this live learning that you'll do with our experts. Beyond that, we'll also have a few mock interviews with peers, so you'll get to connect with others in the program and actually implement the technical and behavioral interview strategies that you're learning. So it's just a fantastic program, great way if you're recruiting right now to run up the learning curve really quickly and get all the prep you need. And again, to learn more from Alejandro, who's a fantastic instructor. So would love to have you. If you don't win the giveaway, which we'll announce at the end of this event, you'll still get a discount code, $700 off the bootcamp, which is huge. And we'd love to have you with us.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick. And just to give everyone a little bit more details on, for example, what we cover, I'm covering both technical sessions, and the first session is more around, I'll call them kind of the overview of a technical interview and the more basic questions around valuation, accounting, and corporate finance. In the second session, we're going to do a live model where we do a 3-statement model in an hour and a half, and you get a template. We'll work through it together. We'll then build DCF, and we'll make sure it's been simplified quite a bit. I've put a lot of time to making it hopefully digestible and making it as simple as possible, so it's not confusing. I'm a big believer in teaching simple concepts and not overcomplicating things when it's unnecessary. So that's what I work through in my technical sessions. And then the rest of the sessions, as Nick said, are super helpful as well. They have some great instructors, all of which, or most of which, have worked in banking before, and they've been, a lot of them, in recruiting seats. So they know exactly what they used to look for when they were in those recruiting seats. So there's few people to learn what recruiters are looking for that are better than the people that were recruiters before and sat in those seats. So anyways, second shout out for it, but make sure you enter the giveaway. So moving on to the fourth tip, and this one is it kind of encompasses all of them. It's an overarching tip that applies to everything you do. And it's around practice and preparation. So in banking, every single time that you go to a client meeting, you're going to be like very over prepared, right? The client might ask you one question and your MDs are going to be like, here are 6 different questions they might follow up with. So let's be prepared for that. If you're going to go talk to the CFO of Procter and Gamble, like, you better know what their stock has been doing the last 6 months. You better know what they announced at the last earnings call. You better know what the competitors are doing. So you need to almost over prepare for everything. Because that's how banking works, that is kind of the expectation of what people are testing whenever you do a coffee chat or an interview, right? So I'll talk about kind of 3 things that will help you do that and to stand out. Number 1, you got to know the bank you're talking to, and you've got to know what makes them unique. So when somebody asks you at JPMorgan, why do you want to work here? And when somebody asks you that same question at Citibank, your answers cannot be the same, right? I'll give you an example. If I were to tell you, hey, I really want to work at Citibank because they're a global bank with a really, really good training program, and junior development is really important to me, and I know you guys have great training programs. That sounds nice, but it's a horrible answer, because that applies to Goldman, that applies to Morgan Stanley, that applies to JPMorgan, that applies to Bank of America. I can name 10 other banks that check the box in a global platform with good training. So you need to have unique answers. Now, how do you come up with unique answers? Your best friend is going to be coffee chats, people that worked there before, even if they're classmates of yours, and the investor relation website. Almost every single bank is public, and they'll post their investor relations presentations where the CEO often talks about his or her priorities for the year, what the bank is focusing on, and in general makes big announcements. So reading any of that is super, super helpful. I'll give you an example for one of the things I really liked about Goldman that I figured out through talking to people that I used during my interviews that made Goldman unique. Most banks structure themselves with coverage groups, or industry groups, and product groups, right? So if you go work at JPMorgan, for example, and you want to work in the healthcare industry, there's a healthcare group, but there's a separate M&A product group. So if you want to do M&A, you're better off, if the only thing you want to do is M&A, you're better off in that M&A group, as opposed to maybe the healthcare group, because the healthcare group will kind of hand off deals to the M&A team, right? So that's the majority of Wall Street is done that way, particularly on the bulge brackets. Goldman is unique. Goldman does everything in that coverage group. So the coverage group does the M&A, does the IPOs, does anything related to debt, does any sort of client coverage. So to me, that was really unique about Goldman and really important to me. And why it was important to me is because I want to get exposure across different things. I did not know what banking really was, right? I had never worked in it. So it was really valuable to me to be able to do an M&A deal, an IPO, and a debt offering, and figure out which one I liked best, which one I was better suited for. So it's really important through conversations and through research that you understand the bank you're applying to, and you have a unique answer for what makes that bank special for you. The second thing, particularly for coffee chats and interviews, whenever you can't always for interviews because they don't tell you, but if you know who the banker is that's going to be talking to you, you've got to research them. And it goes beyond LinkedIn, because LinkedIn sometimes has good information, sometimes doesn't. But you got to know where they went to college, what they studied, where they interned before. And there's two big reasons why. Number one, because it makes you just, your questions are so much more thoughtful, right? You're not like, oh, tell me about your prior experiences. Instead, you can be like, hey, I saw you worked in accounting before going to business school and switching to banking. What triggered that change? Because I'm currently an accounting major and I'm kind of thinking of where I want to start. It's a much better question, right? Than just, oh, what did you do before banking, right? So number one is you'll have better questions. And number two, you want to build rapport, right? You want to build a relationship with this person as quickly as you can. And anything you can find on their resume, another resume, their LinkedIn, anywhere online, if you know if they're from Philadelphia, they're probably Eagles fans. And if you watch the game, you can bring that up. If they went to Michigan for undergrad, they're probably football fans as well, or sports fans, and you can bring that up. If you saw they grew up in Boston and you grew up in Boston, you can bring that up, right? So that research is going to help you kind of build a strong relationship with them early in the interview or the coffee chat. And it's really critical because this is how you start every single, uh, you know, work meeting, work event. It's all about kind of building this rapport, and it's going to be super helpful to do that. The final thing here is, how do you get better at this, right? And it's just doing mock coffee chats and mock interviews. How do you do these, right? A lot of you may be like, I don't know how to do these. Well, number one, there's 45 of you on this call that can all find a way to meet each other and do coffees and do mock coffee chats or interviews. Number two, if you do things like the boot camp, you're going to meet 20 plus people there or 30 plus people there that all are interested in recruiting for banking, that will happily and probably be very thankful to do a coffee chat with you. Number three, in school, whether it's in your classes or the clubs in school or whoever it is, find someone to do a mock coffee chat and a mock interview so you can keep practicing, because the answers in your head may sound very logical because you know a lot about yourself. When you say them out loud, someone can be like, hey, Alejandro, I actually don't understand the connection you made between why you were like interested in biology in high school, but went to college and studied business. And it might make you realize, oh, in my head, it makes a lot of sense, but I didn't spell it out for whoever's listening to me. And that's really important with a lot of this stuff. So do the mock chats and mock interviews. And once you get to interview stage, once you get invited to an interview and you are getting ready to actually go kind of, you've put in all this work, you've practiced so much, you've prepared a lot, you did the coffee chats, you progress through the system, you finally have that interview. I would really recommend that you mock interview with a professional that's maybe not a student. If you can do a student, at the very least do that. But if you can find someone on the LinkedIn platform or any other resource you may have to interview with someone that has conducted interviews before, it just is super, super, super helpful, because again, you'll get a more real world experience, and rightfully so, you'll be a little bit more nervous, which is good because you'll be more nervous in your real world scenario, right? So before you do that real interview, make sure you try to find someone to do those mock interviews with. So I'll pause there on the fourth tip. Do we have any questions before we move on to the last tip of the night? Take advantage of this open forum to ask questions about anything in recruiting. Nobody's judging you here. Probably nobody else knows who you are. So if you have any questions, throw them on the chat. There's no bad questions.
Hi, Alejandro, this is Bucky.
Yes.
Thanks again for the session. This is actually very helpful. This might be actually not related to the point four, but in general, when is the best time for recruiting for investment banking for someone who's been out of school for the past 18 months? I'll just give you a little bit of my I guess, current situation. So after my MBA, I got into one of the, of course, IBs, but not on the IB, but more on the middle office, on the ops middle office. And then I took several months off because my son was born and I'm returning back from paternity right now. And I'm trying to break into IB. I know how possible it is. And then when is a good time to, I guess, start recruiting, so.
Gotcha. Baki, so great question. It's very specific to your situation. So use the link if you'd like and book an intro call with me, and I'm happy to talk to you kind of separately, just because it's a very particular situation and I want to make sure we focus on questions here for the group. So feel free to just book some time with me, an intro call, and I'm happy to chat with you about it.
Thanks. I scheduled already for tomorrow. So
Oh, well, there you go. Perfect. So the other question we had in the group was, how do you maintain a relationship after a coffee chat, right? And of course, that's a very valid question. There is no magic answer. Typically, what I do or what I would recommend is you find what I'll call them like trigger points, right? And that could be a new semester you started, or a new in-semester internship you're doing, or you landed an interview somewhere. So that could be a way, you can finish your coffee chat with, hey, it was so good talking to you. I have two quick questions. One, is there anybody else in your group that you could connect me with? I would love to speak to other alumni of my school or whatever it is. And two, is it okay if I keep you updated on my progress? I'd love to kind of keep you updated. And if you ever have any feedback, I would love to, listen to you. And then maybe you go forward to next semester and you land an in-semester internship somewhere. So you send the banker a quick note. Hey, thanks again for chatting last semester. Uh, just wanted to keep you updated a little bit on my progress. I continue to dive deeper into banking. I now joined this new club. I've participated in these other 3 seminars. And by the way, I'm going to do this really cool internship in the spring. Just wanted to keep you updated and let you know. Would love to catch up again later this month or something like that. Uh, so use any of those trigger points that you can that are kind of like life or career events to do so. That's kind of the most natural. Alternatively, you can always reach back out later and be like, hey, we spoke last September, reaching back out. And just to give you a quick update, here's what's happened in the last year. I would love to connect again and talk a little bit more specifically about healthcare banking or something that you didn't talk about during the first call. So I think that's kind of the best way to tackle that one. And then the kind of last tip, and then feel free to put questions in the chat, and we'll get to them in a second. But my last tip is a little bit. It's kind of a mental tip, and it's not one you can quite like just act on. But the reality is, this is a tough industry to work in, as you all probably know. It's a tough industry to break into, and I don't say that to brag on behalf of anyone. It's just the reality of what it is, and what that means is you need to be resilient and persistent. So number one is, you are going to get ignored. You're going to send emails that nobody answers. You're going to get rejected. Like, you're going to think you crushed the interview, and then you're going to get a thank you for applying, but it was a competitive process email. And you cannot let that put you down, right? Like, you got to learn, try to look back at that coffee chat and be like, what did I maybe mess up? Maybe I answered this question not as well as I thought. Or maybe you learn that, during the interview, you messed up a technical. So learn from them and go back to the drawing board and just try to be better next time. Number two, as I said, you have to stay positive. You still have to stay persistent. You got a rejection email right now, you have a coffee chat in 5 minutes, you've got to brush it off and be like, whatever, I got rejected there. I got to move on. I got to move forward. You can't walk into that coffee chat and be like, oh, well, yeah, I'm having an okay day, right? Like, you've got to make sure that your attitude is always very positive. On that note, make sure in your coffee chats and interviews that you have a great attitude and a lot of energy. And I'm not saying be fake and start jumping up and down, but the reality is, you're talking to analysts probably that are quite tired, that probably, they've probably been in Excel or PowerPoint all day. And this is like a little bit of a different thing they're doing with their day, right? So take advantage of that. Be really chirpy, be really happy when they ask you how your day is. Don't be like, oh, it's going well. You're like, look, it's going great. I took a whatever, weather was awesome today. So earlier in the morning, I got to go on a run. I love running, right? Like, bring up the energy in that coffee chat, because again, a lot of times they're going to be very thankful, and they might be in like a kind of a grumpy mood, but if you do that, that might turn the whole coffee chat around into a very positive experience. And then the last thing I'll say is you got to stay in the game. It's a persistence and resilience thing. So like I said, you got to follow up. You've got to apply again, even if you get rejected from stuff, you reapply, and you've got to always kind of try to continue to show your growth, right? So as you go through coffee chats over time, it's always good to be like, yeah, I started thinking about banking before school, but then I started school as a finance major, and I was unfortunate enough to join multiple clubs. In those clubs, I've now gotten promoted. So now I'm the VP of communications in the banking club, which has been really interesting because now I help with X, Y, and Z. So showing that growth and that resilience is going to kind of continue to help you and be a really positive thing. So that's the final tip. So now we are going to kind of open it up in a second for Q&A. I'm going to answer 2 quick questions, and then Nick, I think I'll hand it over to you for the boot camp giveaway. But we got a question here on how would you recommend reviving a lost contact that you haven't spoken to in 2 years? It's going to be awkward if you haven't spoken to them in 2 years. So I think it's just simply like, hey, so and so, it was just reaching out. I was a classmate of yours at XYZ school. I've been working in consulting for 2 years, or whatever it may be. I've been working in XYZ for 2 years, but I've really grown to grown a big interest in banking, and I'm really looking into making a transition. I saw you started there right out of undergrad, and I would love to just kind of pick your brain for half hour, hear your story, hear how you broke in, and I'm always open to suggestions and feedback from you. So I think that's kind of the way to do that. Another question is, I've followed up with a lot of people on LinkedIn, and they haven't responded to me. You should definitely follow up. I wouldn't follow up like 10 times, but I think it's totally fine, like a week or 2 weeks after, to be like, hey, just wanted to bring this note back top of your inbox. Would love, even if it's just 20 minutes, to catch up with you. Let me know what day works best. I can be flexible. So definitely follow up. Definitely reach out to more people. So this goes back to my tracker suggestion. You got to have a tracker with like dozens of people you're planning to reach out to. You can't just be like, I'm reaching out to these 10 and I hope they all say yes. You've got to assume that only like 10 to 20% of the people will get back to you. So if you want to talk to 10 or 20 people, you got to reach out to 100. So you got to make sure that you have a tracker to help you keep yourself organized. I don't know if this is a real question, but is having an AI generated picture for your LinkedIn profile a good idea? Probably not. I would recommend just having a real picture if you can. But yeah, I'll say that. I'll jump into the other questions in a second. In the meantime, I'll let Nick chime in.
Awesome. Just wanted to hop on and announce the winner of our giveaway, who is Miguel. Miguel, super excited to have you in the program with us. I'll send you all the info you'll need to join us tonight. And for everyone else, would love to have you in the program as well. Definitely text or email if you have any questions before you join. We're getting started tonight. If you can't make it, we'll send you the recording, but definitely would love to have you with us. So thanks everyone, and excited to have Miguel with us.
Congrats. It's always nice to win. So I'll stick around and answer 1 or 2 more questions, but in the meantime, if anybody needs to hop, they're welcome to. Here's a link if you want to book an intro call with me or a coaching session with me. This is the way to do it. To answer a couple of the questions that we got, one was, how do you recommend networking as a high school student? I think you have to be very mindful of it because, again, people remember first impressions. I don't think you need to be doing any networking as a high school student, to be frank with you. If you really, really want to do it, I would focus only on like warm introductions. So I would only do it with people that are like, even if it's a far introduction, but like my cousin's girlfriend's friend works in banking, and he or she can make an introduction, because that way they'll like understand that you're in high school and be a lot nicer. You don't want to get on a call with like an associate and be like, hey, what does M&A stand for, right? Because I'm not saying you don't know that, but as a freshman, obviously, or as a high school student, you got a lot to learn. So I would only do recruiting or networking in high school if it's through a warm connection. Can you provide more examples of a good story on why banking like the example you gave of the biology major choosing a health group. So yeah, your story just has to make sense, right? So if you tell your story to your grandmother and she doesn't know, and you tell her what banking is, like, is she gonna be like, that makes sense, or is she gonna be confused? So you've got to make sure it's logical. So another good example that I've heard recently is someone that said that, you know, their mom ran a restaurant or owned like a Mexican restaurant in college, and he would work in there and be a busboy and be a server and be everything, but he also eventually started helping his mom with the finances, with like closing the cash register and dealing with the credit card statements and all that stuff. And he found that super interesting, and that's what piqued his interest into finance. And then he decided to go to Bit2 undergrad and study business and join investment banking clubs and this and that. And it just makes like logical sense, right? Another one that I would say is I recently had a student who interned their freshman summer at like a really small startup, like a 5-person startup. And she was able to work on a number of things in that internship, right? She helped with everything because it was a small startup. So everything from like growth strategy to like it was an iPhone app. So like developing the app, making the graphics, doing the marketing. But one of the things that she worked on was helping fundraise. She helped build a couple slides for the fundraise. And I was like, that's your story, right? You're like, I came to college thinking I wanted to do finance and explored further. I was really fortunate to get an internship at a startup. And during that internship, I did a number of things. But the one that caught my attention the most was the fundraising we did. We wanted to raise some capital to be able to, you know, grow the app. And the fundraising thing was super interesting to me, thinking of the investors, thinking of how the fundraising works. That really caught my attention. And it cemented my idea that I really wanted to work into banking, because that's what bankers ultimately do. Right. So you just got to find a way to take your story and fit it into a nice sounding one. So yeah, that's that one. And then I got a question here that you know, Quinn, congrats and go Gators. But in general, if you get into a school that you deem to be a less of a target school or core school than another school, I would say obviously it's always better to be at a target school. It just gets you easier access. But a school like UF in particular has a really good pipeline into banking. So what I would recommend for all of you, if you're considering one school versus another, particularly around college, is go look on either their website or on LinkedIn to see how many alumni work at investment banks. And that'll tell you how good of a pipeline that school has. So you can just type in people that went to fill in the blank school that currently work, and their title is investment banking analyst. And you can take a look and see who are some of those people, where they are, what bank they're at, how long they've been there. And that'll tell you, like, that'll be a good, you know, proxy for you to identify if it's a good school for that. The other thing I would do is I would talk to the school and ask to talk to their career center and be like, hey, can you tell me like how many people went to work in investment bank last year from your undergrad program? They have that information, and a lot of them are willing to share it. So make sure you ask the questions and you kind of put yourself out there to get the answers you're looking for. So anyways, this is kind of the end of our seminar today, or of our office hours. So thank you everybody for joining. Again, you've got a link here if you want to book an intro call. The boot camp starts, I believe, in like 45 minutes. If you're looking to sign up. But other than that, thanks everyone for joining.
Just a quick question, Alejandro. Where's the
Yeah.
where can I find the link for the bootcamp though?
I am
Or
sure
information there?
Amanda will put it in the chat.
Yeah, once you fill out the giveaway form, the giveaway link, you'll be directed to the website, and you'll also receive a text message and an email with the discount code for tonight. I'll go ahead and send it in the chat one more time.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for that actually.
Sure. There you go. Thank you.